It now gives me great pleasure to invite on stage our distinguished guest of honor, Minister Heng Swee Keat, Minister for Finance, to deliver his opening address.
Ambassador Gopinath Pillai, Chairman of the Institute of South Asian Studies and US, Professor Subrata Mitra, Director of the ISAS, Ms. Vijay Singh, Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting me for this conference. I think one remarkable aspect of the conference is that we have friends from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, France, Japan, Korea, Russia, South Africa, Poland, Brunei, Luxembourg, and the US. So a very warm welcome to our delegates that come from so many different places. I have the pleasure of speaking at this conference in 2011, at your 2011 ISAS conference, just after our general election. And here again, I'm speaking at this conference on the 10th anniversary, also after the general election. So it looks like Ambassador Pillai is sort of following the election cycle in Singapore. I was just talking to my good friend, Dr. Duviri Subbarao, the former central bank governor of the Reserve Bank of India. And while Ambassador Gopinath Pillai congratulated me for my appointment, I shared the story that when we were in the central bank governors always regard finance ministers as being on the dark side. And I say, well, I've moved to the dark side. Because finance ministers in many places are under pressure to spend more and more, and central bank governors are then under pressure to rein in the finance minister and be the good guy to make sure that the economy stays afloat. Now, I'm pleased to see that ISAS has grown from strength to strength. Just in the last few years alone, and certainly since its founding, I think the number of attendees for your conference, for instance, has doubled since I came 4 years ago. But it's not just the numbers that cheer me. Having more of us here today means that we are able to build a wider network of relationship, deepen trust and respect, and share insights and experiences between friends and well-wishers. And in that way, we bring good ideas together and we can help one another go forward. And having this network of friendship and this platform to share wisdom are precious things. So I'm glad to see ISAS living up to this role, and thank all of you here for being part of this effort. I also wish to congratulate ISAS on the book you published this year to commemorate 50 years of diplomatic ties between Singapore and India, with forwards by the two prime ministers of Singapore and India. I'm confident that ISAS will continue nurturing strong scholarship, build constructive engagement, and establish itself as a default platform for inter-regional dialogues. Now, as many of you know, we celebrated SG50, or Singapore's Golden Jubilee, this year. It has been a meaningful year of celebrating our last 50 years and looking forward to our next 50 years. So if I may seek your indulgence to say a few words on something else that is also 50 years old, which is our friendship with India. Singapore and India have an enduring friendship rooted in centuries of contact and strong people-to-people ties at all levels. India was the first non-European Commonwealth country to recognize Singapore as an independent nation. And in fact, India's own successful fight for independence, led by Pandit Nehru, inspired our founding fathers in our struggle for independence from Britain. And our relations have steadily deepened over the last 50 years. Our ties are multifaceted and deep on economics and trade, defense relations, legal, and cultural and people-to-people exchanges. In recent years, Singapore has had the privilege of contributing to India's development agenda in certain areas where we have niche capabilities. For instance, we had a chance in helping in the master planning of Amaravati, the new capital city of Andhra Pradesh. Singapore also shared our experience in water treatment, with High-Flux undertaking water projects in Dahej SEZ and the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor, and in Surat. And we also supported the revival of the iconic Nalanda University. And indeed, we will have the pleasure of welcoming Prime Minister Modi in Singapore next month on an official visit. And as part of his visit, I'm sure that we would elevate our relationship. Now with this, we can look forward to even greater sharing of ideas, friendship, investment, and trade between Singapore and India. Just as I'm confident about Singapore's future, I'm also confident that the potential ahead for relations between Singapore and India too, as both countries continue to make progress. Earlier, Ambassador Gopinath Pillai mentioned my previous work in the Ministry of Trade and Industry. And during that time, I spent many hours speaking with our counterparts from around South Asia. I had many fruitful discussions with counterparts in India when Ambassador C. Chakman was the High Commissioner in India. That led ultimately to the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement, or CECA, between India and Singapore, which took effect in August 2005. We hope the CECA would widen the road for Singapore and India to engage, deepen linkages between Southeast Asia and India, and catalyze a bigger trade liberalization movement. And indeed, CECA has brought our countries closer together and grown our trade links. When we started the work on negotiating CECA in 2003, total trade between India and Singapore was about 5.9 billion. Last year, it was 24.6 billion. So a fourfold increase in just about 10-12 years, which is very significant. And CECA also created opportunities for Singapore companies in India. For example, the easing of investment restrictions and the easing of FDI caps enabled Singaporean companies to enter the India market or raise their equity holdings, such as Singtel's investment in Bharti Telecom. And I'm also glad that CECA was a pathfinder for other regional trade networks, serving as a template for some of India's other free trade agreements, such as with Malaysia, and a catalyst for other FTAs, such as the ASEAN-India FTA, with the section on services and investment coming into effect in July this year. So indeed, we look forward to India, and indeed all our friends in South Asia, continuing to grow. And I wish you success on the regional comprehensive economic partnership as you seek to grow economic ties and strengthen ties among the countries in South Asia. Other than India, other South Asian countries are also becoming increasingly integrated with the region, as well as with the rest of the world. And momentum for economic cooperation has been building within the region. India and Pakistan have revitalized ministerial-level negotiations on expanded trade. India and Bangladesh have also enhanced bilateral ties, including in power trade. And I believe this bodes well for South Asia, which is expected to grow strongly in the coming years. Now, I think the key is not just how much countries grow, but also how countries grow. Because this determines whether growth and development can be meaningfully sustained in 10, 20, and even 50 years. 50 years would seem like a short time for a country like India with a very long history and a very long civilization. But sustaining good growth and development for several decades is not a simple matter. And this is especially true in the current age of globalization and transformation, where everyone is interdependent and where economic and technology cycles have become more compressed. While the world would have changed in unimaginable ways in 50 years' time, I believe there are some important economic principles for development and which will likely hold, not just for emerging economies, but for developed ones as well. So let me take a few minutes to speak on these principles. The first is market-oriented and pro-trade policies underpinned by strong macroeconomic fundamentals. First, why trade? I believe that trade allows for specialization, and the insights of Adam Smith about the division of labor holds true today, even truer today than the time that Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations. I visited a few major high-tech companies involved in very knowledge-intensive work, in very technology-intensive work recently. And I was struck by how in these very knowledge-intensive, technology-intensive companies, they took such great pains to emphasize the need for specialization and the need for bringing these different specializations together in order to create new innovative products. And when I asked them, what really is the heart of what you do? And they said, well, our ability to really specialize and go deep into subjects and at the same time to be able to integrate all these different strands of knowledge in new and meaningful ways. And if it is true for a small team of people working on a particular area, I think it probably holds true for countries big and small as we think about a global division of labor and a global and a national division of labor. So that's on trade. And why market-oriented policies? Well, I believe that the market not only provides signals, the price signals for us to allocate resources efficiently, but it also allows for the creative energies of people to be harnessed in the most optimal way. Because I think increasingly growth will come from good ideas and how we execute those ideas. And by freeing up the energies, the creative energies of people, I think we're more likely to have new breakthroughs and new products and which can meet society's needs. And why macroeconomic fundamentals? If we look at countries which have massive problems, whether in the fiscal area or in the trade area or having to do massive currency changes, it is because short-term policies that drive growth ultimately come back to haunt us in terms of destabilizing the economy. You either get very high inflation or you get very high and volatile growth and inflation numbers, and which is something which central banks, for instance, try very hard to keep stable, because I think a stable backdrop allows for economic agents to make good decisions. So strong macroeconomic fundamentals, reliance on markets, and an exchange of goods and services, not only at the national level but at the global levels, are important means of sustaining growth. Prime Minister Modi's efforts to make India the manufacturing hub of the world are a good step in that direction. And the world has noted India's enhanced focus in infrastructure investments, with increased investments in infrastructure and the setting up of the 20,000 crore National Investment and Infrastructure Fund. Also, significant efforts are being made to simplify negotiations and introduce tax reform, such as through the Comprehensive Bankruptcy Code and efforts to implement a national GST. Now, we recognize that trade liberalization and economic reforms are complex and require political will and a forging of consensus. India's own experience over the last 2 decades with the Look East policy from the early 90s and the past policies of reform and liberalization show that India can do it for the benefit of its people. And we look forward to India succeeding and this initiative bearing fruit, for it will be a boon for the region and for Singapore as well. And let me add that such efforts in restructuring our economy can never stop. Preparing the economy and our people to be ready for the future is a never-ending effort. And it is easier to be ready for the future than to catch up with the present. And that is the reason why Prime Minister Lee has set up the Future Economy Committee, where we ponder about the future of jobs, companies, resources, technology, and markets. And real sustainable growth can only come from hard and continual work of restructuring to keep up with increasingly dynamic markets. The second principle I'd like to speak on is about equitable distribution of wealth. Equitable distribution of wealth is key for sustaining economic development. And there are two dimensions in this: equity between different groups in society and equity across generations. In 2013, there was a debate between two major figures in economic thought, Professor Jagdish Bhagwati and Professor Amartya Sen, on India's governance priorities. Sen believes that India should invest more in social infrastructure, such as health and education, to boost the productivity of its people and thereby raise growth and improve standard of living. Professor Bhagwati argued that only a focus on growth can yield enough resources for the state to redistribute and mitigate the effects of the initial inequality. It was quite a fierce debate. My own view is that these approaches are not mutually exclusive, but actually are mutually reinforcing. Growth needs equity, and equity needs growth. Because when you have an equitable distribution, there will be better support for growth policy. But to have the ability to redistribute wealth, you need to also generate the resources to be able to do that, and that requires growth. And therefore, growth needs equity, and equity needs growth. They are mutually reinforcing, not mutually exclusive. So governance priorities must strike the right balance based on the consensus among the population. Now, the other aspect of equity is intergenerational equity. That is the equity between generations, including generations that are not born yet. And this underpins the achievement of equity between different groups in society. Again, if we look around the world, the nature of electoral politics is such that it is easy for politicians to promise the current group of voters what it wants, and then to spend lavishly and pass the bill onto the future generation, be certainly children, but also to generations which are not born yet. Because if you can incur a debt for a very, very long term and hope that 30, 40 years down the road, someone else will pay for the bill. And part of the problem that we see in the form of the budget deficits and the high government debts in certain Eurozone countries are a testament to that. So I believe that policies must be prudent and not impose undue burdens on future generations. And this is sometimes not discussed enough because the effects take decades to unfold. Now, the third principle that I would like to speak on is about the development of resources which will always be of value. That we need to focus on developing resources that will always be of value. In one of the conferences, I spoke about how primary commodities, agricultural commodity, was the main item of trade. And in fact, the Dutch and the British fought fiercely over an island which is now today in Indonesia, Pulau Air, because the island grew the most valuable spice in the world at that time, which was nutmeg. And nutmeg was sold in Europe for profits which even today's hedge funds would not dream of. And therefore, the two superpowers, the two of those of the day, fought fiercely over it. And so fierce was the fight that when the Dutch won, the Dutch got this island, and the English lost, and the English got a swampy place called Manhattan. And today, you see today I think very few people know about this island, which grew nutmeg, and Manhattan is Manhattan. Now, so some of this, what is valuable today may not be valuable tomorrow. And how do we invest in resources which will remain valuable in the future? I believe one resource that will always be valuable is land, which is what today's conference is about. The land has certain permanent value, but it has to be managed carefully so as to support equity between groups and between generations. For instance, while private landowners should secure land rights, this must be balanced carefully with the need to develop land to benefit the general public. And for a small place like Singapore, we are very, very conscious about how we use land and how we create public space. So, in fact, one of the things that we are doing a lot of is to develop a lot more public parks, park connectors, and so on, because those are important ways of raising the standard of living of our people. And when Mr. Lee Kuan Yew had this vision of a garden city, it was prompted by the fact that he saw these very beautiful gardens in private homes and in bungalows. And he said, well, no, I think access to beautiful plants and trees and space for children to play should be available to everyone, every citizen, every resident in Singapore. And hence, we embark on a huge effort to plant trees and shrubs all over Singapore, including on our highways. If you notice some of our highways, when we even have a gap in between lanes so that sunlight can get through to the plants below. And that was Mr. Lee's vision about land and public space and common space, and how we can use common space to create this sense of ownership in our society. And of course, a lot of land was set aside for public housing so that everyone owns, every family can own his home, and in that way feel that that land that is so scarce in Singapore can be used equitably, and that everyone has a share in this country. So the politics of land, and indeed the purpose of our land policy, is an important subject, and I think you will have very fruitful discussions with many experts. Let me touch on another resource which I feel will always be valuable, and in fact is the most valuable of all, and that is our people. And indeed, even more so than land, and investments in people must be prioritized. There must be opportunities for people to always learn through life so that they have the right skills to be able to create and seize opportunities to come by, and to have that level of education that allows them to enjoy a more fulfilling and purposeful life. And people must have the confidence and the will to push the boundaries, to pursue a better life for themselves, for their family, and to contribute back to society. And indeed, I believe that ultimately, the purpose of economic development is about people. What gives economic development meaning is the lifting of millions out of poverty with improvements to their health, safety, and quality of life. and ultimately to give people opportunities to achieve their potential through access to education and good jobs, so that they can fulfill, so they can lead meaningful, fulfilling life. Now, those are the three principles about, market-oriented, trade-oriented policies underpinned by economic fundamentals, and investments in resources that really matter. Yeah. And but I believe that there's no one-size-fits-all approach. There are complex trade-offs to be made in any society. And indeed, if you look at the recent, some of the more careful analysis of economic policies and economic institutions, one very important conclusion is that, while the principles can be seen in many of the successful institutions, the way in which it's implemented, the way in which institutions are devised to meet those needs, and the way in which the governance structure is done, do differ significantly across societies which have made progress. So there isn't one view of the world, even though one may have the same principle. There isn't one set of institutions that meets the needs of every society, because every society is different in terms of its culture, its history, and the reality of the politics. So different societies will develop in different ways because they are different. And I had a chat with Mr. Panda just a few minutes ago about how Orissa has made a very significant progress in the last decade. And the key part of that is really governance, good governance. So I believe that this can be done, as long as one has good governance. And the heart of good governance is the trust between people and the government, and the trust among people. And that engenders a willingness of all parts of society to work together and each to do their part for the greater good. So I believe that this sharing of knowledge and the challenges that different countries face, and this learning of experiences from one another will be valuable. And I congratulate ISAS for organizing this platform. There is such rich potential for learning, because we are all at different phases of development, facing different challenges. So I wish you a very fruitful and enjoyable conference, and to our friends who come from various parts of the world, I hope you take some time to enjoy some parts of Singapore. It's a small place, so you can get around quite quickly. Yeah. Thank you very much.